Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Toledo Driscoll Alumni Center. I'm Susan Ross Wells. I am the Director of Healthcare Marketing for the University of Toledo Medical Center and a member of the Marketing and Communications team that is led by our Vice President for External Affairs, Lawrence J. Burns. Glad to be here tonight and to host this event. We're going to introduce our panelists in just a minute, but just a reminder, we are here to educate and inform and hopefully take your questions and get you the answers that you've been looking for as we deal with this water crisis in Toledo and across our region. Right now, I have the honor of introducing our interim president for the University of Toledo, Dr. Nagi Naganathan.
Good evening. Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to have all of you here this evening. Let me also add my welcome. Some of you may know I've been in this role for a little over a month. And one of the typical questions I've been getting is, have you had any surprises yet? Well, I did. But the event is behind us thanks to many. Many are in this room and many are in this university that helped us deal with this problem. But we also recognize we have to be proactive, and hence this evening. We are proud to present to you tonight an educational forum designed to help you better understand many of the underlying issues that contribute to the problem of algal blooms. We also want to talk about actions we as a society can take to help minimize and prevent an incident like what happened this weekend from happening again. Not only in Toledo, actually I would say to Toledo, but also to communities anywhere. This particular forum is entitled Harmful Algae in Ohio's Great Lake, and that is for a reason. This is a problem of algae in our Great Lake. This is not a Toledo problem. There are so many people I want to thank for helping to guide and unite the city during the past few days. Let me recognize just a few, fully knowing that this list is not complete by any means. I want to thank Mayor Collins and Governor Kasich. Thank you to Senators Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown, and to Representatives Marcy Kaptur and Bob Latta. I want to thank other elected and other government officials. Some of them have taken the time to join us here today. I would like to recognize State Senator Randy Gardner, who is here. Senator, if you can stand up and be recognized. In the back. I have from Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur's office, Jane Rovolo. Jane? Okay. Oh. From Congressman Bob Latta's office, Melissa Short. Melissa, there she is. And we also have Commissioner Carol Contrada in the audience. Commissioner, there she is in the background. And there are many from the city. I want to thank all of them. I also want to thank businesses who helped to divert resources this last weekend. As you know, our hospital was running in full swing. The university had to be maintained, and they helped the entire community in a very significant way. And I believe tough times can bring out a community's true character, and I am so proud of what recent events have revealed about Toledoans. I want to thank the University of Toledo trustees for their continued support of this institution and their support as the administration dealt with this issue over the weekend on our campus. However, tonight is not a discussion about the past few days. We are not going to try to present a commentary on the past few days. Instead, this panel is going to look deep into the past, and it is going to look forward. How did we get to where we are today? What causes those blooms? And what needs to change to prevent this from happening in the future? By the end of this evening, it's our goal that you feel better educated on some of these issues. Ultimately, it is a well-educated populace that will be our most powerful tool to bring about real and permanent change in the Great Lakes. In addition to great experts from across the University of Toledo, all of them will be introduced a little later, I want to give a special welcome to Dr. Mike McKay from Bowling Green State University. UT and BG researchers work on many topics together, and the need for collaborative work is even more evident from what happened in the last couple of days. The research is not just by these experts. They have a great deal of colleagues in their laboratories. There are hundreds of students that participate in the research, and they have brought about a library of incredible knowledge on this topic, and you are going to hear some of that. And what we are saying is not just in the future tense. We have reason to believe we can contribute because we have done it before. One of our panelists is Dr. Patrick Lawrence. He and other faculty and students have led the effort on this campus to clean the Ottawa River. And Dr. Lawrence is chair of the River Commission, and they helped to clean that one of the chief tributaries to Lake Erie. And of course, the problem scale is different, and we need to scale up for the future. Finally, I want to state, as a public research university, it is our responsibility to use our resources to advance the community we live in. This is a responsibility we embrace, and hence this evening. By sharing our results with fellow scientists, with elected officials, and with members of the public, as we are doing tonight, we will find solutions, and as a community, we will make the right choices for our future. At this time, I would like to welcome our panel moderator, Ms. Susan Wells, back to the podium. Susan will introduce the panel and then also direct our Q&A in the second half of the forum. Again, this forum tonight is just a first step, with more to come. Thank you for joining us here in person, and also there are many out on the web. Again, enjoy the evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naganathan. And I will sort of be helping to manage all of this as we get into these topics tonight. And I'm going to start off by letting you know that once we hear from the panelists, we will open it up to questions later on, and we are encouraging questions on Twitter as well tonight. So if you don't feel like speaking in front of this audience, or you have someone at home who's got a question, they can send it on Twitter to #ToledoAlgae, and I'm monitoring Twitter up here. So I would like to introduce our panelists. We're very grateful that they've all given their time this evening. I'll start with Dr. Carol Stepien. She's right here by me, Distinguished Professor of Ecology and Director of the UT Lake Erie Research Center at the University of Toledo. Also, as Dr. Naganathan mentioned, Mike McKay, PhD, Patrick L. and Deborah Sheets Ryan, Professor of Biology at Bowling Green State University. Thomas Sodeman, MD, the Professor of Medicine and Chief of the Division of Gastroenterology at the University of Toledo. Dr. Isabel Escobar, she is Professor of Chemical and Environmental Engineering here at the University of Toledo. Patrick Lawrence, PhD, Professor and Chair of Geography and Planning at the University of Toledo. And last but not least, on the end, Kenneth Kilbert, Professor of Law and Director of the Legal Institute of the Great Lakes at the University of Toledo. And we'll start right here with Dr. Stepien. Dr. Naganathan just referenced a look into the past, and I'd like to go there now with you. Talk a bit about the history of this algae issue. How do we get to this point? This is nothing new, and there is a long story behind this.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Carol Stepien. I'm the director of the Lake Erie Center. I have a wonderful job. I look out my window. I see Lake Erie every day. I see both its beauty and its tragedy from day to day. And today it did not look so bad, but yesterday this was what it looked like. And so this is a water sample that was collected yesterday from our lake, and I don't know if I can pass this around perhaps, but I would not suggest getting it confused with my glass of water here. So the Lake Erie Center is a research and education center, very proactive for the University of Toledo to establish it and open its doors in 1998. I've been the director for 10 years, and our mission is to be a leader in research and education efforts. I work with everybody on this panel almost every day, and many of those who can't be here today. For example, our resident algal expert is Dr. Tom Bridgman, who either fortunately or unfortunately is today on vacation in Alaska, away from cell phones and the media, and so we've been taking all those answers. Also, we have other researchers who aren't here today. Dr. Kevin Chikowski from the Geography and Planning Department is currently in India doing research. We have Dr. Cindy Gruden from engineering, who we work with often. We also have Dr. Christine Mayer, who has been helping me every day at the Lake Erie Center, fielding calls and answering questions because we've had reporters upon reporters. And Dr. Daryl Dwyer, who has been doing the same and often acts as interim director when I'm out of town. Now, I've been working on the Great Lakes, doing my research and education efforts for about 20 years now. I grew up in Cleveland on the lake, swimming in the lake, etc., and I've drank the water for most of my life. On Saturday, I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists conference. I woke up, I got the alert. Thank you, UT, for I got the alert. First of all, I called my husband, who was on the golf course. He was a little mad. I told him, well, maybe you should go to Costco and get some water. And then well, he didn't want to. He was just going to play golf. So actually, he was with Jane Rubilo's husband. So I couldn't even reach my husband because he didn't have a cell phone. So I called Jane's husband. I said, can you put my gym on the line? And so he was a little bit mad at me, and he didn't take it seriously. He said, well, I'll just boil the water. I go, well, no, you won't. Boiling concentrates the toxin. And then so I thought, well, Jane had mentioned this to me that the city of Oregon's water was testing clear, so I looked it up really quick online. I told him, well, go to Lake Erie Center and fill up your carboys. And he actually filled up for all of our neighbors, too, because, of course, there was no water to be had. And then my direct supervisor, Dr. Karen Bjorkman, the Dean of the Natural Sciences and Mathematics, she emailed me and she asked me for the code to the Lake Erie Center so that she could do the same. And so this went on. Now, I was both surprised by this, but not surprised, because this has been coming on for some time. I saw reports that the Maumee Bay State Park had 19 parts per billion microcystin toxin on Friday. And every day I look at the lake, and every day our students are out on the lake, like Devin Edens here took some photographs from inside the water crib. He was out with the city of Toledo, where we have a lot of equipment. Now, the harmful algal blooms have been coming on for 50 years. We've known about them. We cleaned them up in the 1970s when we had the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and we also had the Clean Water Act of the US. So we have legislation that cleaned up the point source pollution, the pollution that comes out of pipes, so the phosphorus coming out of pipes, helped establish modern sewage treatment plants, etc. So we did a really good job then. We also got rid of phosphorus from our detergents, from our household detergents. Now, what has happened since then? Well, we have a lot of agriculture. Remember, in the Great Lakes, we have the world's largest freshwater resource. But in the Maumee River, we have the largest watershed. It's 63% agricultural. And during the last 10 years, as Dave Baker, one of our colleagues from Heidelberg University, has told us, we have much more dissolved reactive phosphorus. So this phosphorus has a source. Scientists know the source. It's coming off of agricultural lands and CAFOs, so confined animal feeding operations, which have increased greatly. So this is bringing water directly to the nearest ditch, stream, river, then into the lake. And this is what we really need to do to address this problem. Now, we have about 10% of the problem still from pipes, from sewage treatment plants, et cetera. We also need to address that. And this is all compounded by the influences of climate change and invasive species. But the primary problem is the reactive phosphorus. Now we have ready solutions. Our scientists have been on top of this. We have the best scientists and technologists in the world. So in February, we have this report, which is available at the Lake Erie Center website. It's called A Balanced Diet for Lake Erie, Reducing Phosphorus Loadings and Harmful Algal Blooms. It has 16 points for our legislatures, both the US and Canada and our state, what we can do. It's very scientifically proven, it's outlined, etc., and this is what we need to do. So as a public, we need to embrace our scientific know-how, our technology, etc. We've done this before. We can do it again, and we can clean up our water, and we can clean up this problem if we act together. Now, we also, in the state of Ohio, last year we had the Ohio Lake Erie Phosphorus Task Force, which Dr. Tom Bridgman from our university, Dr. Jeff Reuter from Ohio State University, the director of the Sea Grant, we're all on this. And this mirrors most of what was on in the other report that I just showed you that came from the IJC. So we have a plan, we have guidelines, we know what we need to do, we know what the cause is, and it is time to mobilize and act. Just like when the Cuyahoga River burns, it actually burns several times, this closure of our Toledo water is the wake-up. It's like Rachel Carson writing Silent Spring. You know, got rid of DDT. She had a lot of feedback against, a lot of politics to fight through. But we now have bald eagles and our birds back. We have a better world for Rachel Carson. And I believe that our University of Toledo and the people in this room can act together to solve this problem. We have the blueprint, we know what the causes are. It's been coming on for a long time. It was no surprise. In my estimation, the city of Toledo, Brenda Snyder is their lead chemist. She is on our faculty in chemistry. She did a wonderful job. She has gotten almost no sleep. I talked to her about 12:30 last night. I told her to go to bed. But she said she went back and she drank the water that evening because
Dr.
it's at the
Stepien.
lower limits. So thank you for letting me talk, and I hope we can all do the right thing and clean up our water.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I wanted to move on to our next panelist, Mike McKay from Bowling Green State University. We've heard a bit about the fact that, yes, there are environmental factors involved here that have brought us to where we are today as we sit here in this room. What can we learn, though, from the algae itself, and what makes this type of algae so toxic?
Well, thank you, Susan, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the University of Toledo for hosting the panel this evening. This is a great public service to the community and also to the scientific community as well. I'd like especially to thank Dr. Frank Calzanetti and his team for reaching out to BGSU to participate in the panel. As was stated earlier, you know, we are rivals, our two schools, but we are also very strong regional partners, and that's evidenced in the strong collaborations that exist between faculty from BGSU and Toledo as well. So I started working on algal toxins in 1991 when I joined the University of Alaska as a postdoctoral researcher. I've been working on and off on this issue since that time. I joined the faculty at BGSU in 1997 and started working on the cyanobacterial problems at that time. And since that time, with my BGSU colleagues, Dr. George Bullerjohn, Dr. Bob Vincent, who's now retired, Dr. Jeff Miner, as well as colleagues from other institutions, notably Dr. Steve Wilhelm, University of Tennessee, and his students, folks at Environment Canada, Greg Boyer at SUNY ESF. I can't omit Dr. Doug Kane, who's in the audience tonight, who's at Defiance College and also the incoming president of the International Association for Great Lakes Research. He's also contributed to a lot of the studies as well. So microcystis, you've probably heard sort of lumped in the category of algae. And that's fine. Algae is sort of a catch-all for simple organisms that live in the aquatic environment. Not all algae are harmful. In fact, most algae are actually considered to be beneficial. They're important primary producers, serve at the base of the food web. We have a vibrant fishery in Lake Erie because we have algae. The algae are consumed by zooplankton or planktivorous fishes, and the carbon and nutrients are eventually transferred to the big fish that we like to catch and eat. However, there are some ugly ducklings in the room, and microcystis is certainly one of those. It's prolific in its growth, yet it's not one that's favored by organisms as a food source, so it's often rejected by organisms that live in the environment. And so that helps to allow it to be maintained in the environment beyond other competing phytoplankton species. I want to mention that not all cyanobacteria are harmful. You've been hearing the terms microcystis and cyanobacteria tossed around this weekend in the media a lot. Most cyanobacteria are actually beneficial primary producers in our ecosystems. Most cyanobacteria are microscopic single-celled organisms that we can't see with the naked eye. It's these colonial filamentous cyanobacteria which are often associated with toxic, noxious conditions. So Dr. Stepien showed you some algae, and I just want to show you two samples here. This is the one that was collected from the Lake Erie Center. Yesterday you mentioned, okay. This is one that was collected yesterday from adjacent to the city of Toledo water intake. So take-home message, this looks a lot cleaner than the water at the Lake Erie Center. But what I want you to see from this, though, is these algae in here, and you may be able to make it out from the front rows, they're floating, okay? And that's a characteristic of the microcystis algae. They have gas vesicles and they're buoyant. And that's one of the characteristics that help them to be successful in their environment above other competing phytoplankton. As phytoplankton are essentially aquatic plants, and so those of you who are gardeners in the audience or watching in the live stream, you all know what the ingredients are for plants to flourish. They need sunlight, they need water, they need carbon dioxide, and they need nutrients. The water is not a problem. The sunlight, by being buoyant and floating to the surface, microcystis has a competitive advantage to be able to capture more sunlight that way. Carbon dioxide, it shouldn't be a big problem in the aquatic environment, although alkalinity in the lake has gone down since the introduction of the zebra mussels, and likely lower dissolved carbon dioxide in the lake. Cyanobacteria have mechanisms that allow them to use alternate forms of inorganic carbon, bicarbonate ions, that other algae don't have that advantage. And then nutrients. We're talking mainly phosphorus and nitrogen. Phosphorus is long being held as the limiting nutrient in the lake, and it's certainly one that we can look to as the nutrient that helps to promote accumulation of biomass in the lake. Nitrogen is also important here. We don't often think of nitrogen as being a limiting nutrient in aquatic systems because there are many organisms that have the ability to take up atmospheric nitrogen, convert it into fixed nitrogen, and introduce it into the system. Microcystis can't do that themselves, but they do have the ability to use alternate forms of nitrogen, and there's some thinking recently that the form of nitrogen in the environment, whether it's nitrate or ammonia or urea, may be an important factor in whether or not the microcystis produces toxin or not, because not all microcystis is toxic. There are many forms of microcystis which are non-toxic, many forms of toxic microcystis that are not producing toxin. It's environmental factors that are actually promoting whether or not toxin accumulates. And so these are some of the questions that me and my colleagues are trying to address now. Factors in the environment that may actually be promoting the production of toxins in these cells.
Thank you, Doctor, very much. From there, obviously, our biggest concern as we've learned that we weren't able to drink our water was the fear that maybe we would get sick from drinking our water. So we have asked Dr. Thomas Sodeman to join us on our panel tonight from the University of Toledo Medical Center to share with us how this makes us sick and what we should be thinking about in terms of our health. Dr. Sodeman.
Well, thanks for having me here. A lot of the data that looks at what this does, and you've all heard what the toxin was, microcystin, comes from animal studies. There's really not good human data because no one's going to load humans up with this stuff. So a lot of the data comes from studies with rats, mice, some studies with pigs, and what happens to livestock and dogs that get a hold of this stuff. The microcystin itself, the molecule, it's a very interesting circular molecule, and because it's circular, it's very difficult for it to break down. It is absorbed not very well in the intestine. Most of it will probably pass through us if we're exposed to it. But it gets absorbed by cells in the intestine, and it damages those cells, which is what causes a diarrhea when people are exposed to high quantities of this stuff. Next place it goes is the liver. Everything that we absorb from the intestines goes straight to the liver. And that's where the majority of the damage would occur, again, if someone is exposed to very high levels of this. It binds to enzymes, and basically the bottom line is it induces a state in the cells where they die on their own. It's a process called apoptosis, and it's happening in all of us right now normally. Cells become old, they decide to die, and they sort of break up on their own without irritating any of the cells around them. And if that happens just every once in a while, you're fine. But if a big load of this winds up in the liver and all of the liver cells decide to do it at once, then you have problems. Now, the data that came from mice and rats and such, what they would do is they would expose them in two different ways. They would either basically pump it into the stomach, different levels of the microcystin, or they'd inject it into them. And if you inject it into them, they'd die. That's makes it much more toxic. And what they looked at is what particular level of this would cause damage. And there are levels that don't particularly cause damage to the mice or rats or pigs. And they would study them for a long period of time too, generally about 3 or 4 months worth of exposure to this stuff. Now, were the levels in the water high enough to be causing anything like this in treated or untreated water? Probably not. Where we wind up with problems with this is actually if you're out in the lake and for whatever reason in the world swimming through this green slime, which really is a bad idea, then you're going to be exposed to very high quantities of this stuff. And where we do see deaths from this, and no person has ever died from drinking this stuff. Now, there have been deaths, and I'll get into that in a second, but no human has ever died from this as far as we know, but pets and livestock do. Livestock will get a hold of it in their water tank. They have a big bloom of this stuff, and they don't care. They're just drinking the water, and they get a very high load of it. And dogs actually have a tendency to get a hold of this. What they'll do is they'll get the dried algae at the side of the lake, and if you know dogs, you know they like to eat some strange things. And actually there have been studies that show if you offer mice the dried algae or their regular food, they're going to go for the dried algae. There's something in it they like. But they'll eat this dried stuff and just get huge quantities of it and die. So if you're not eating dried algae or swimming in it, you're probably going to be okay. Now, if you've looked this up online, you might have seen issues about cancer with it too. It is not something that directly causes cancer, and we're not entirely sure, but it may promote cancer, meaning if you're exposed to this and you're exposed to something that might be a carcinogen, that's something that would potentially cause cancer, it might make it a little more prone to do something like that. There have been reports coming out of China in areas that are living next to lakes that have high levels of this. There's higher incidence of liver cancer, but of course that's unfortunately China, and you don't know what else is in the lakes there, so it could have been a whole variety of things. Here in the United States, we really don't think it's much of a cancer risk at all. And that's really the bottom line. It can cause trouble, but you really have to mix up with the stuff at very high levels. So that's why we close the beaches when there's blooms, because we don't want people out there swimming in it, and pet swimming in it and such. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Soderman. And I'm going to turn now to Dr. Isabel Escobar. She is Professor of Chemical and Environmental Engineering at UT, and wondering if you could explain why boiling water, we've heard this a lot in recent days, boiling water doesn't do any good. In fact, it may make things worse. And how can we treat the water to make it safe? What are we doing? What are we doing now that we weren't doing a week ago?
All right, great. Before I start, let me take a sip of City of Toledo tap water. So first I want to talk a little bit about this cell. And there has been a lot of talk interchangeably with this is an algae, then we talk about cyanobacteria, then we talk about a toxin. So the first thing that comes to your mind is, well, I'm going to boil the water because I'm going to kill the algae because we're talking about something that is alive. So let's talk a little bit about the toxin, and bear with me as I try to make diagrams with my hands. But if you think, let's pretend that the algae is this round circle here in my hand, and they're producing the microcystin inside the cell. So it's intracellular, and it is when that cell breaks apart, when it dies, that gets released. So this toxin is already coming from something that is dead. So boiling it will not be able to really do anything. It's already dead. You're not killing it. And when the news came in and told you that it would actually concentrate, because if you think of boiling water, the water is evaporating. It's coming out. So if you started with 1 liter of water or 1 gallon of water with a certain amount of this toxin in the water, now the water is evaporating, the toxin is staying there. So this was the big harm of boiling the water, that we cannot kill it because it's already dead. So let's talk a little bit about what is it that the water treatment plant has been doing, what is it that others are doing in order to attack it. As we heard from Dr. Stepien, this is a problem that's happening everywhere. It's not only ours. This morning I was in a conversation with some people from Cleveland, and they're prepared for this. They're also dealing with this, and we know that the city of Oregon also is prepared for this and was proactive about this. So we have this cell. So remember that I said that it's intracellular. When the cell breaks apart, it becomes extracellular or outside of the cell. It's now the toxin. So ideally, we want to remove that cell. We want to get rid of the algae itself. So we don't want for it to die and explode as to release the toxin. So a lot of what is done, there are several methods of filtration. Now we heard a lot about home filtration systems won't do a thing, and that's because there's such a large array of home filtration systems that there's a lot of fear of saying that, yes, home filtration systems will do it, will take care of it, and all of a sudden you are using one that does not take care of it. So there are certain filtration systems that will remove the entire cell. So if the entire cell is removed, that toxin is never going to get in the water. The problem is, as you are pumping the water into the water treatment plant, as those cells are going through filters that are a little bit more violent to the cell, to where the cell is hitting the filter, the cell can break during that transport, during those times, and release the toxin. Now this toxin is very small. We're talking about something in the range of around 0.1 nanometers. So we're talking about something very small, something that can go through a lot of the treatment, a lot of the filtration. So what our treatment plan, what a lot of the other treatment plants do, they use a treatment called powder activated carbon. And this powder activated carbon, all that it is, really is this activated charcoal, and the toxin does attach to the charcoal, and it gets removed when the charcoal is removed. So now it's attached to the charcoal. And this is what the water treatment plant did. They played around, for lack of a better word, they tested a variety of different water qualities with this, and they kept increasing, and I believe they went from a dosage of about 6 parts per million of this powder-activated carbon to 15 parts per million of this powder-activated carbon so that they could actually remove it. This is by trial and error. They cannot plug in a formula and say this is how much we need to use. They have to actually take samples of the water with the mycotoxin, put different amounts and different periods of time of contact in order to remove. So this is why I'm drinking the water, and the water is safe. And much like I started my brief introduction here to treatment, I'm going to end it with another sip of water.
Thank you, Dr. Escobar, very much. Right now we're going to turn to Patrick Lawrence. He is a PhD, professor and chair of geography and planning at UT, and want to talk about the phosphorus some more, why this is occurring, how the phosphorus is involved, what are we doing that's contributing to the phosphorus in the lake. Of course, we've talked about agriculture, but we know there's more there. And what could we be doing differently? How can we change things?
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I don't want to repeat too much what's been said, but Carol certainly picked up a few of the points in terms of, we've been dealing with this phosphorus issue in the Great Lakes for a number of decades, and had a lot of success. I think our point is well taken, that we have been able to manage this problem. We've come together not only as a community like Toledo or Ohio, but across the Great Lakes and with our neighbors to the north of Canada to address phosphorus-related issues back in the 1970s and the early 80s. So we have a means, ability to do it. But the problem is shifting a little bit, the type of phosphorus being dissolved. The sources and locations of where that phosphorus is coming from is different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. The kind of things we're looking at very closely in terms of the sources include a wide range of sort of point sources that come out of pipes, much of which we've addressed, but some of them still exist. For example, wastewater treatment facilities, again, not just here in Toledo, but throughout the basin and in the Great Lakes, to make sure those plants have the right equipment, have the right technology, have been upgraded. And many of you are aware in the city of Toledo there's been an initiative going on, the Toledo Waterways Initiative, for a number of years under consent agreement with federal courts to address or combine sewer overflows, which occur during heavy rain events where we have direct discharge of a mix of both sanitary and storm water into our rivers that then goes into the lake. That practice has been reduced greatly, and we're continuing to do that kind of infrastructure improvement for our wastewater treatment facility here in Toledo. That kind of effort needs to go on throughout the Great Lakes and also up the river and in the basin. I think to keep in mind here is Toledo is at the tip of a funnel, if you think of it that way. And behind us is a huge watershed, the Maumee River watershed we're referring to, which is over 6,000 square miles in size. Many of you might know the main branch of the Maumee River, which we associate, because we see the last several miles of it in our community as it discharges into Maumee Bay, actually goes back in distance about 150 miles, back as far as Fort Wayne, Indiana. And from there, flowing downstream, we're also picking up hundreds of miles of ditches and rivers and streams and tributaries in this large land area that contributes water into the river that ends up ultimately into the bay. So when we talk about the solutions for phosphorus, I'll talk about a couple more of those in a moment, I think the one thing we really need to keep in mind is this is a large-scale regional problem, and that it's going to take a solution at that scale, working with the state of Indiana and in Ohio and in Michigan, hundreds of jurisdictions, and also working with other states because the problem is going to occur and the issues are of concern in other areas in the Great Lakes, both on the U.S. and the Canadian side. So it's going to take a big concerted effort to deal with the problem that we are seeing here in Toledo, because we're seeing it sort of at the end of the flow of the water, and of course we're pulling out our drinking water from that same system. So infrastructure improvements are important in all communities, not just Toledo, throughout the entire watershed. It's going to be critical. In addition, we have to look closely at other ways in which we handle our wastewater, because that is a source of the phosphorus, and that is in a rural landscape, septic systems, other means in which we're managing that to make sure they operate correctly, they're in place, and they're not accidentally discharging more waste and phosphorus into some of these ditches and tributaries, et cetera, as I mentioned before. And again, that's a large-scale regional problem. It's not just Lucas County, Wood County. It goes for the dozens and dozens of counties within this watershed that potentially could be contributing to that problem. You know, the other source we can look at, similar to the septic systems, is in our urban communities, we use fertilizers on our lawns, both for business application and residential. How we use that, the amount we're using it, how it's being applied, when it's being applied. We have to look closely at that as every individual on our own property, how we can best manage the use of our fertilizers on our lawn. Just like we're very careful about how perhaps we use other chemicals in our house and other materials to make sure that we're not having an impact on our air or our water or our soils. The same needs to go for the fertilizers because of the phosphorus that's within those. And the other element that we've already talked about, of course, is in this large watershed, there's about 4 million acres that are actually agricultural, that are under various forms of active cultivation, and it's been that way for decades. Farming is a very important part of our community. It's a very important part of our economy here in the Midwest, including here in Ohio. And they are responding to market forces and trying to produce a product at a cost and make the industry and the economy effective in that regard. But that also means that we have to look carefully at the land management practices. And I will say, if you go back 10, 20, 30 years, you will see within this basin, and it's been well documented by research and studies, that our land management practices on farmland are improving. We're seeing a lot of better effort and working. A lot of farmers are very interested and cooperative. They're stewards of the land. They're concerned, just like we are, about the environment they live in, and they're concerned about the land and the water in which they're operating and their operations potentially could impact. But we still need to do a lot of work there. We need to look out and reach out and look at the problems, where soil erosion is occurring, how can we keep the soil on the land. If you keep the soil on the land, then you can keep the pesticides, in this case, the phosphorus that we're concerned about, and the nutrients, on the farm field, where they need to be, why they're being applied, how they're being applied, to make sure that's continuing. But it's a large-scale problem, and if you look across an area as large as we're talking about, the success and ability to deal with urban and rural runoff is really a mixed story. We see successes, we see improvements, but it's not consistent, and it's not necessarily something that is at a level in which we're having a dialogue and discussion about and working on the problem and trying to come up with solutions. And I think the take-home message that I would sort of like to relay to all of you is that we're all citizens. We live in the community, whether it's Toledo or whether it's Perrysburg or wherever it might be, Ohio and Michigan, or anywhere within that basin. So we all need to be good stewards. We also need to be informed and educated about this issue. We take our air quality and the quality of our food. It's very important to us. We need to start thinking about the quality of water, not taking it for granted. And we all have a role to play as stakeholders and landowners and property owners and voters to take this issue up. And as Carol has pointed out, there have been a number of studies, a lot of good science, a lot of good policy and decision-making putting into these reports that gives us a blueprint to go forward. What we need to do as a society and as a community across the entire basin is take up that charge and make sure in the coming weeks and months and years we begin to address this problem. And we go to our elected officials and we go to our politicians, we go to the experts and say, we want the solutions. We want to move forward on this. Let's figure out a way to do it as a community.
Thank you very much. And really a next step there is sort of the legal piece of this, which is we all decided earlier today that it made sense to put you on the end, the last word here. But as we look forward and think about what we need to change, are there new laws that should be in place? What are the types of things that this community needs to think about moving forward?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the university for including me on this panel with these distinguished persons of science. I am not a scientist. I don't even play one on TV. But you really can't understand this harmful algal bloom problem without understanding the law, and the law is going to have to be a part of solving the problem going forward. So with respect to really understanding where we are currently in the law, it's a complex mix of federal and state law applicable to these various sources of phosphorus entering our waterways. You heard the term point source, also non-point source, and that's a critical distinction because the law treats them differently. The Federal Clean Water Act treats or handles, regulates not point sources much more rigorously than they do non-point sources. So point sources are those end-of-the-pipe discharges from industrial plants and from wastewater treatment plants. Non-point sources are basically stormwater runoff, diffuse sources, and agricultural runoff being a key example of that. Under the Clean Water Act, point sources must have a permit in order to discharge into waters, all right? And it's unlawful to do it without a permit. Those permits set limits on the amount of a pollutant like phosphorus that can enter into the waters. And the Clean Water Act, since its enactment in 1972, has been pretty successful in reducing the amount of phosphorus entering the tributaries and Lake Erie from point sources. From non-point sources, not so much. The Federal Clean Water Act really doesn't regulate non-point sources. Rather, they really rely on incentive programs to try to entice voluntary reductions of non-point source pollution, and that includes stormwater generally and agricultural in particular. And so that's, at the federal level, really it's left up to the states to regulate non-point source pollution. And unfortunately, Ohio, like most states, hasn't done much with respect to regulating that. Again, relying mostly on voluntary programs, some of which very, very useful, very helpful, but not enough at the end of the day. And so where do we go from here? How do we improve the situation? Well, there's no silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. It's a multifaceted problem. It's an international problem, a multi-state problem, and it's going to require cooperation on a number of different levels. But there are things that we can do right here in Ohio without the cooperation of other people in connection with the law to try to make things better. Things like just making point sources make more rigorous limits on the discharge limits for point sources. Home sewage treatment system. The Ohio EPA estimates there are 140,000 leaking, or I'll call discharging home sewage treatment systems, think septic tanks, in the state of Ohio. We need a permitting and enforcement program for them. With respect to lawn fertilizer, commercial fertilizer, other states have enacted bans on having phosphorus in those fertilizers. We could do that as well. So there's a variety of different things we could do, but let me just take 1 minute to focus on what certainly has been discussed before, is agricultural activities. What can be done there? Current law, state law with respect to agricultural activities, is pretty limited in scope. There are very few requirements. Enforcement of them is rather difficult to do. And so there are certainly limits on what's there. As far as going forward, I'd like to make three comments, three recommendations with respect to going forward. One is with respect to current law. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources now, under current rules, could declare the Lake Erie watershed a distressed watershed, which would kick in automatically rules that were put into place by the legislature in the aftermath of the Grand Lake St. Mary's algae outbreak in 2010, and these type of requirements saying you can't put manure on frozen ground, requiring the farmers to engage with a nutrient management plan in order to do that. So that can be done right away. Secondly is that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources could also issue rules. They have the authority to do that now, to lay out specific requirements, best management practices for crop growers, animal feeding operations, so that that is a requirement and not just an incentive going forward. And then lastly is that the Ohio General Assembly needs to get into gear as well. Most of the law currently relating to the agricultural pollution abatement relates to manure. Those powers need to be extended to include commercial fertilizer, which is really accounts for almost 2/3 of the fertilizer in this basin, whereas manure accounts for about 1/3. So there's a lot of things that can be done. I'll resist the shameless plug about my article unless somebody asks about that later.
Kenneth Kilbert, thank you for finishing with a bang there, too. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing, and this is your opportunity now to engage with these folks. If you've heard someone speak and you have a question for one of our particular panelists, we'd ask that you come down to the microphone with your questions. I'm going to start, though, with a Twitter question that we have received from a woman. Her name is Lara Besley, and her question was that she has read that it could be zebra mussels or lake sediments that are fostering the growth of these algae blooms. Is there any truth to that?
Let me take that.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, what we think is that the zebra, but more likely the quagga mussels have replaced our zebra mussels, so they're both invaders from the Ponto-Caspian Sea. We don't have very many zebra mussels left in Lake Erie. We mostly have quagga mussels, that they have been processing phosphorus differently than the zebra mussels did. So the zebra mussels actually help to filter the water better than the quagga mussels that have taken over have, and so they may actually be adding to the problem, but they're not the primary problem. So the primary problem is still dissolved reactive phosphorus coming into the system from the runoff. So-
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Could I add to that
Please.
as well? The sediment is a massive reservoir of phosphorus as well. That is the accumulation of phosphorus that has made its way in from the watershed over centuries, millennia. And we've all, I'm sure most of you have heard, in the room have heard of the Lake Erie dead zone, and that's the seasonal zone of, we call it hypoxia, where the bottom waters become depleted of oxygen. Also in the western basin, we have transient hypoxia, sometimes anoxia, and certainly in the sediments, we have, if you look at profiles of oxygen that extend into the sediments, oxygen is depleted rapidly in the sediments of Lake Erie. In those environments, phosphorus is resolubilized and can make its way back into the water column. And so this is, to get a better handle on the flux of phosphorus that's recycled within the system will be important here as well.
Thank you very much. I believe we have a question here. Yes.
Hey, my name's Carl. I had a question both for Mr. Gilbert and for Dr. Escobar. As far as your question, I wanted to know, has the Ohio General Assembly or Governor Kasich or anyone in recent legislative history passed any certain exemptions for commercial, CFOs, controlled animal feeding operations, factory farms? Any legislative exemptions or tax breaks that you know about? And as far as Dr. Escobar, I wanted to know, are you aware, is the city of Toledo testing just for the specific toxin, or are they testing the entire water column for everything from metals and metalloids to volatiles and non-volatiles? And if you guys could just elaborate on that.
All right, I'll be brief on that. The concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, actually are regulated as point sources under the Federal Clean Water Act, and that has been true for some time. Here in Ohio, the authority for that originally was with Ohio EPA, and a number of years ago was transferred over to the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And so I don't know that there's anything new on that score. Certainly CAFOs are a problem, but they are a regulated field.
All right, my turn. Thank you, Carl. That was a great question. So we have rules. The US EPA that was started thanks to the Cuyahoga burning and Lake Erie being completely dead, they developed the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the Safe Drinking Water Act has primary standards and secondary standards. Primary standards are things that can essentially either kill you or make you very sick very fast. Secondary standards are taste, odor, the aesthetics of the water. So water treatment plants and the EPA do daily measurements of an array of these, especially the primary ones. This microtoxin, so they are testing for metals, they're testing for organics, they're testing for pretty much for the hardness of water, you name it, they're testing. And if you go to the City of Toledo website, they do yearly put out the average water quality that you are drinking. So that information is available. And if you ever want to call the water treatment plant, and I'm sorry to water treatment plant employees that I'm saying that you can call and ask them about the water quality. But this specific one, this microcystin, this is not a guideline. So it's not in the Safe Water Drinking Act. It's not in any of the rules and regulations about water. It's a suggested level by the World Health Organization. So it's a little difference in the sense that they don't have to meet it. The City of Toledo actually chose to monitor it and monitor it daily as it has been. Other communities monitor it weekly or even bi-weekly or not at all. And it's the test that we use here in the whole issue of sending the samples out to other places, that the test that we use has a much lower accuracy. It's a simple test kit. It has a low accuracy, and it depends a lot on who's looking at it. So I can read it and come out with one value. You can read it and come out with a different value. So they sent it to laboratories that have much more expensive and sophisticated equipment that can give very exact levels for these. But yes, the water is safe to drink.
And before we get to our next question, I just wanted to mention that we are asking folks to limit it to one question each. We want to get as many people as we can here tonight, and also that we aren't really going to be expecting our panelists to speak specifically to some of the happenings over the last 3 days or so. It's more how we got here, where we go from here. So obviously you understand their expertise. So yes, our next question.
Yeah, Tom Henry at the Toledo Blade. I wanted to ask Dr. Sodeman, although I'm possibly getting ahead of ourselves here, but that's what reporters do. I've been getting barraged with a lot of different things, naturally, as everyone has during this crisis, but could you explain, has there been, I think I've seen an email or two that suggests that exposure to this microcystin could possibly be linked to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease. I mean, it's a neurotoxin, and it's in the environment, scientists have said it's has nearly the potency, not quite of dioxin, but it's up there. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, risk assessment, does Lou Gehrig's disease possibly come into play like cancer does? And what else do you know, and can you tell the audience about the neurotoxin?
Well, I'm a liver guy, so I can't really speak to anything about Lou Gehrig's disease, unfortunately. This stuff is worldwide, though, and it varies from place to place, and there are a lot of places, both here in the U.S. and overseas, that have very high levels, and as far as I know, I don't know of giant clusters of Lou Gehrig's disease around these areas, but it's not a very well understood toxin either.
I can add something to that. There's also a separate toxin called, I don't know the full name, its abbreviation is BMAA, and it can be produced by a number of organisms. There is some evidence it can be produced by cyanobacteria. There are some epidemiologists working on this at present. They are centered or based at Dartmouth College, and they've been asking for samples to be collected from cyanobacteria in Lake Erie to be testing for levels of that toxin. Again, it's a very any connections are very unclear at present, but there are several papers been published in the literature the past 5 years providing a tentative link between BMAA and conditions similar to Lou Gehrig's disease.
And remember that the cyanobacteria are busy making a whole lot of things. They don't just make microcystin. They make a lot of stuff that we have absolutely no idea what's in there.
Thank you. We do have another question from Twitter I want to share. It's from John Pantel, and he wants to know, is there a particular crop that requires or contributes to a higher use of phosphorus-based fertilizers that then wind up in our water? If there's anyone who feels they're able to comment on that.
To some degree, corn is one of the crops that tends to be sort of on the side of more need for use of fertilizer and nutrients. But it's not the only one. I mean, the mix of crops in our basin, when you look at large-scale cultivation, tends to focus on 3 crops primarily, and they're rotated. So you're talking about corn, soybeans, and wheat. Obviously, there's other cash crops and things that we're growing, but those are the 3 large-scale sort of cultivated crops. And it's not so much, I think, the issue of how much it's applied. It's how it's applied and the best management practices, when it's applied, and the technology. And if anybody's familiar with, and I know there are probably people in the room who know much more about agricultural practices than I do, but the technology in delivery of these materials onto farmland has increased dramatically in terms of using global positioning systems, in terms of how they're applying, and the technology and science, and also a lot of effort in the state of Ohio by the Extension Service out of OSU and other groups to work with farmers and working on practices. And so we're getting there. And and also the issue of what crop it is just how we manage that and how we're using the material regardless of crop.
All right, thank you. We want to get to our next question now from the audience.
Hi, my name is Amber. I'm actually a current student at UT, but one of my questions was, it's been said a lot that this has happened in the past and it was a possibility of happening again, and I think if I understand correctly, that the Ohio EPA is not as lenient, I think, as it should be, or I mean, is too lenient. And so, I'm wondering, since this has happened in the past and it was, predicted to kind of happen again, Was anything being done until the algal bloom, or was it just that it's algae season, and they said, well, it could possibly happen, we might as well check, it kind of thing? Like, was it, since it was it was a big possibility it could have occurred, was there anything being done to prevent it, or did it happen and so they did something about it, and is it going to be prevented again in the future?
I'll take that one. The Ohio EPA has been very proactive, in my opinion, because they were part of this Ohio Lake Erie Phosphorus Task Force report. And so this is a effort by our state agencies and our best scientists in the state to come up with phosphorus recommendations. So we have been having increased algal blooms. The worst one to date was in 2011. That was 3 times worse than anything we've ever seen before in terms of concentration and area. So it's not a surprise that we had the closure of our water. It was kind of a perfect storm of events, though, this past week, where the winds and the weather conditions were just perfect. Even my student Devin was out on the crib today on the lake sampling, and he said the winds were all blowing the algae right into the crib and right back on shore. So this normally buoyant algae that Mike showed you is being forced down by the winds. And 25 feet deep, our intake is three miles out, and is designed to help prevent this. And so our city's been desperately and very proactively cleaning up our water and letting us know. So it was amazing to me when Devin showed us the photograph of the crib today that they could clean it up, and get rid of everything. So I think we've been very proactive in this, but it's going to take a lot of work to clean up our lake and prevent harmful algal blooms. The good news is that the lake will respond quickly, but the bad news is we have to achieve a 40% reduction in dissolved reactive phosphorus, and we need to start to do that now and today. We can't afford to wait. When you have 500,000 people with a jeopardized water supply, and you're right, this will keep happening. I would store your water containers in your basement and get ready for later on in the season, because we're not at the worst of our algae season, we're at the start. The worst is usually the last week of August to the first 2 weeks of September. And so you're right, we all need to be proactive, but we don't need to point fingers at our agencies and our scientists who are working so hard. We need to be proactive and work together to solve the problem.
Thank you, Doctor. We want to get to our next attendee with a question.
Yes, my name is John Klein. I'm the president of the Environmentally Concerned Citizens, South Central Michigan, and our organization has been around 15 years, and we're in CAFO country in southern Michigan. I'm very familiar with the NPDES permits that you talk about, which you call them regulations. I'd argue with you on that one. These animal factories or industrial agricultural facilities do not use the same technology that the commercial fertilizers use in placing the phosphorus and nitrogen and the CAFO waste in those positions. Study I did recently shows that there's about 51,000 just cattle, mostly dairy, in the Maumee River and the Raisin River. We don't want to neglect that watersheds. That will produce, I'll get right to the end number, you're going to end up with about 6 million pounds of fertilizers, not P2O5, we're talking pure fertilizer, that's been just going into the Maumee River and the Raisin River feeding Lake Erie for some time. Now, my question to you is, and we know this is a problem, but my question to you is, do you think it's time that the state legislatures buckle down and turn the voluntary laws into regulations that are enforceable, and that the medical field and the universities back this openly?
Sure. So CAFOs are certainly regulated, and they're regulated at the Federal Clean Water Act level. OEPA, or Ohio Department of Agriculture, plays a role in that. The issue is how much stricter could they be pursuant to that? Certainly they could be, and that's a factor to consider, but it's certainly only one of the factors involved in this. Most of the agricultural activities, though, are not subject to those kind of requirements. All right, the smaller AFOs, all right, not the concentrated, but the smaller animal feeding operations and the crop growing operations, they are much less so subject to requirements. And absolutely, I think there has to be some requirements that are imposed there. As Pat said, certainly there's been a lot of efforts being done by agriculture. There's no question that's true, and a lot of very good stewards of the land doing what needs to be done. And the issue is really taking what we've learned from that and applying that on a grander scale to reduce the amount of pollution that's being occurred.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, I'm John, and I'm just wondering, we're talking about concentration levels in the lake and stuff. I'm wondering if anyone might know how the impact of the draining of the Great Lakes has been going on for the last 50 years since they dredged it, and they apparently needed 27 feet for the freighters to get through. They dredged it 60 feet, and so now Lake Huron is down 4 feet across the entire lake. Lake Erie is also down. I've been boating with my father, the Great Lakes, my entire life. I remember in 1972 through 76, we had to put sandbags. Lake Erie got so full that it was literally overflowing itself, and now it's down almost 4 feet. Boaters are hitting stuff. I have to believe that the draining of the Great Lakes has had a significant impact on the concentration levels and things that we're dealing with in terms of fertilizers. The lakes are becoming warmer, so I assume warmer water is going to allow algae to grow a whole lot faster. Even 1 or 2 degrees can make a huge difference. Has anyone ever even considered how I know this? Because I have a great friend who works for the Army Corps of Engineers. He's been there 40 years, and he's very familiar with the permits that were pulled for the dredging of the lakes, and they're now going to apparently produce, I think, a natural man-made ice dam around Niagara Falls to try to help fill these lakes back up. But he told me literally 2 weeks ago, even if they put the dam in where they dredged it and brought it back up to, say, even 30 feet, it's going to be 30 to 35 years before these lakes fill back up. Has anyone even considered how that's impacting what we're dealing with?
Again, thank you for the question. It's a very good question, often one we get. Just this week, Lake Superior reached its highest level in 17 years. Mother Nature has a way of working and adjusting in the system. And we know if you go back to 1860, when we have good records on lake levels on all the lakes, that they will fluctuate under a number of variables, including natural variation. And we're also aware that at least since the 1950s, there's been a number of a range of human modifications, diversions, dredging, alteration of channels, et cetera, one of which you referred to. And they certainly have had an impact. But we also know, looking extensively, and there have been millions of dollars and dozens of major, large-scale, basin-wide studies by the top scientists, engineers, and folks in looking at Great Lakes water levels, because we've had a litany of high and low events going back decades. And we were in an extended low below average in all the lakes now for well over a decade. But in the last 6 to 7 months, it's tremendous to see Mother Nature can shift things quite unexpectedly. And with increased rain, with a cooler fall that led to lower evaporation off the lakes at that period, and then of course we're all quite aware of what happened over the winter. A cold, long, extended winter in the lakes. We saw ice over the lakes that we've never seen in quite some time. And the lakes are improving from that. And what happens in the upper lakes, I mentioned Superior because it's important to keep in mind that all this water drains through the same system. And so when we start seeing changes and big increases back to close to norm, or getting closer to norm in Lake Superior, Michigan and Huron, we're going to see that lag effect coming down into all the lower lakes, including Lake Erie. And so the answer to your question is that it is a small piece of it, but when looking at the entire system, human modifications have altered the matter of inches, and yet Mother Nature in just one season can increase the lake levels by many more degrees of centimeters or magnitude that it might be. And as a result, the lakes will fluctuate as part of a system. And even though we know there's human modification to them, we know they go up and down. And the over total volume of water, even at lower levels, is in the billions and billions of gallons of water. So even these changes are not having a huge effect on the total volume of water. But the issue that we face when it comes to lake levels, and if you think of volume of water, and I'm sure Carol's going to mention this as well, is that we actually exist in the shallowest part of the shallowest of the Great Lakes. Right? And there's the problem we lie in. If we're in Superior, it's a whole different dynamic in terms of the landscape and the lake in terms of the amount of water. But we're particularly sensitive to these changes in water level, but also because of the fact that when you have the sediment and the phosphorus and nutrients going in, it's going into a very shallow part of the basin. And without the winds to move it, it sits here and will propagate and create these algae blooms. And that's why, going back years and years, when you see the algae blooms begin to form in the Great Lakes, the first place that we always see them, and where they tend to always be the most extensive, is in this shallower, warmer area in the western basin of Lake Erie.
Touching on your question too, one of the other primary problems that we need to deal with is where to put the dredge material. And we need to stop open lake dumping of this material because it is contributing to harmful algal blooms and also anoxia in the central basin. So you raised a very important point. And of course, this is all the issues are being exasperated. Sorry, I guess. The PhD didn't help with that one, right? But by global climate change, which is leading to our extreme weather, our wind, and this is all forcing this issue of our harmful algal blooms, and unfortunately will continue.
Thank you both for your responses. Yes, next question.
Good evening. I'm Lyman Welch. I'm the Director of the Water Quality Program with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. I want to thank the University of Toledo for holding this public forum and bringing the great wealth of expertise and knowledge here tonight. What's happened here in Toledo, it's crying out both to the city and to the nation for action. This is something that has been building for many years and is clearly a call for us to take care of Lake Erie and the Great Lakes. I really agree with everything that you all have said. The science is there. We know how and what needs to be done to address this problem. And the solutions are there for us to seize. Today, this afternoon, we went out and took this sample of the algae from Lake Erie. And you can see that this water is in distress. It is crying out for us to solve the source of the problem, the nutrients that feed the algae that are threatening Lake Erie and Toledo.
Did you have a question, sir?
Yes. So my question is, given the urgent need for action that we need to have our decision makers and leaders set a deadline and targets for reducing the phosphorus load. I'm optimistic that this will happen. What do you think is a reasonable timetable for our decision makers and leaders to take bold actions to commit to reduce our levels of phosphorus?
Well, I think they all need to read this tonight. You can find it at the Lake Erie Center. There are 16. It's not that bad. It's pretty easy to read this. So there are 16 points in here. And if you want to skip over, that's all you need to do is read the 16 points. They're on about 3 pages. So you can read 3 pages of this document, and there you have your blueprint. They set the total maximum daily loads and a blueprint. We've already had our binational experts. The Canadians will go along with our lead, I'm sure. They've been very good partners for 200 years for our country. And we together can solve this problem. So just download this from the Lake Erie Center or Google it and read it, and you have your answer.
You know, I think, sorry, the other point to keep in mind is there is no need to delay. The answers are here. The recommendations are in place. There's no reason to look for more science. Yes, we'd like to know more about it. There's areas we need to address. But I think the really answer to your question is there is no reason to set a timetable. We can move now. We need to put pressure on our legislature and our elected officials to move. There's good sound science. There's recommendations here. There's no reason that we can't start taking some measured steps and start getting some improvements done, whether it's through the law or other means, in a very quick manner. There's no reason to be taking presumably months or years to still think about this. We can move forward very quickly because it's all in place, because we've been discussing the need to address this problem for quite some time. The solutions are there. So it's up to us to put pressure on our elected officials to start moving forward and get some of this work in place.
The Toledo water... The Toledo water issue is the canary in the coal mine. So we all need to act today and take this lesson home with us and don't delay in taking action.
And I'd like to add, phosphorus is very important. Many are arguing now for a dual nutrient strategy. Nitrogen is important. Sandusky Bay, early June, was depleted of nitrogen. Nitrogen inputs into the bay result in blooms of a similar algae there called Planktothrix, which is also toxic, produces microcystin as well. Knowledge that we're acquiring in recent years is suggesting that nitrogen species, the chemical species of nitrogen, may have an important role in whether or not the cells produce the toxins. So you may still have the green waters, but the nitrogen chemical composition may actually promote the toxin production by microcystin. And one thing that's, there's been an increase in urea-based fertilizers applied in area fields in this past decade. And that's one of the key chemical components that we're finding is actually related to toxin production.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, this young lady has a question.
Hello, my name is Michaela Margita, and I am currently a PhD student at the University of Toledo in environmental sciences, and I'm working with Dr. Song Kuyan to assess the magnitude of the nutrient problem in our Great Lakes using statistical modeling methods. So this has been really educational for me. Thanks, everyone. My question is, maybe for Dr. Lawrence, but also for anybody else who wants to join in. It's become very clear to me, especially after tonight, that agricultural fertilizer usage is a huge contributor to our nutrient problem. However, I remember being really surprised when I learned that a lot of people also fertilize their lawns and gardens. So I was glad that Dr. Lawrence inserted kind of a call to action on that subject a little bit earlier. And I'd like to hear him or anybody else maybe talk in a little more detail about the magnitude of that factor in contributing to our nutrient problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to say that voluntarily Scott's Chemical did remove phosphorus from its lawn care fertilizer this past year, and they are to be commended on that. And we may need to extend that to other types of fertilizer or really look at its components.
I think the related to that question is, if we're going to ask a particular part of our community or our economy in the watershed, that being the agricultural land users, to improve practices and be best managers, because they are a significant source, it seems to me that we all also have the similar responsibility. And clearly, the amount of nutrients that are coming off of residential fertilizer use is much, much smaller than what we're getting off of farm fields. But it doesn't make much sense to me to have one sector and one group singled out for attention when, in fact, we all can do something. And in a basin this large, the cumulative impact, even though it's smaller than from farmland, is still significant when we look at our land management practices as landowners and residential use. So there's a lot to be said for education, improving, looking at the kind of materials we're using and working with companies that can make sure that if we're going to use fertilizer that they're not having an impact in terms of running off. How we manage runoff on our properties. There's a lot of groups very interested in the issue of stormwater retention and what you can do as a landowner or a homeowner to retain water off your property and use it for use of watering or rain barrels bioswales, rain gardens, all of those. There's a lot that we can do as landowners to say, hey, I'm going to take some responsibility, I'm going to pitch in, even though I may be a small piece of the problem. There's something I can do. If we collectively do that as a society, as well as what we can do, as I mentioned before, to lobby and put the political pressure on, I think we all need to look at ourselves and say, what can we do individually? What can I do better in my life in terms of managing my lawn or whatever the case might be, so I'm doing my share.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll get to the next question.
Okay, my name is Hermann von Grafenstein. I'm in the College of Pharmacy here at UT, and I'm also a gardener. I'm growing my own lettuce in my backyard, and I think I've been using microcystin contaminated water to irrigate my plants. So what are the chances that this accumulates in crops, for example, in my lettuce, or generally in agricultural products that are irrigated with contaminated water? I would think not, but it would be nice to hear some confirmation whether or not this is a problem.
Well, the cells have already been removed from your water coming through the water treatment plant, so you're really not going to get anything appreciable.
But
So
even
don't
if you
worry about
watered
it.
the lettuce and the other vegetables prior
It's not
to...
going to accumulate. It's not there in very high proportions coming from the Toledo water supply. The 1 part per billion is one little drop in a giant gasoline tanker truck. So it's very, very small.
So he can
So
safely eat
you
his
can safely
vegetables.
eat your vegetables and water your garden with the water. And I told my daughter, take a shower over the weekend. Don't worry about it. Just don't gulp the water down. I accidentally brushed my teeth in it. I think it's fine. Brenda Snyder said she went home on Saturday from treating the water and she drank a glass of water. She's the lead chemist.
There are also bacteria in your garden that will very happily start eating that microcystin as a carbon source.
All right.
Yes, this question is for Dr. I think it's Stepien. Since the Great Lakes are always monitored, how long ago did the Lake Erie Research Center see this massive algae build up, and how do you remove such a large mass that can be seen from space? Since we was able to see the mass on television that built up in the western side of Lake Erie, how long ago did you all see this build up? And again, what can be done to remove such a large mass?
It's been really building up since perhaps July or mid-July. We've been seeing it. We can see the plume coming out. The plumes coming out whenever the satellites go over. We can see the sediments, and then we start seeing the algae bloom. So we've been seeing it for several weeks. Now today, we couldn't get a glass of water like this. Our water would look more like what Mike had today, because the winds kind of picked up and they blew this around. So what will happen as soon as the wind changes, it's going to blow this algae is going to start to get dispersed throughout the central and the eastern basin and start to break up. However, we anticipate that the algal bloom will continue with the hot, sunny weather until mid-September. But I'm sure that our city is going to continue to treat the water and be very proactive in removing microcystin.
In terms of, part of your question was, can it be collected? Right. Well, that's part of the problem. I mean, you would associate an algae bloom with large plants, with with a large biomass material that almost you could scoop up or use a boom to collect. When you look at the samples in the jars, you'll see that it's as it was described earlier, it's a very fine filament. It's at the surface and it's all the way through the water column. So it's not something that you can kind of put a boom or try to collect. It's out there in such a large area, so small and diffuse through the water column. It's very, very difficult to imagine a technology or technique. There's nothing available to sort of being able to contain it and move it or somehow remove it from the water column.
We are very close to 7 o'clock. I think we can take one more question if you, or I'm getting a funny look from Amy. What do you think? Should I? Okay. Oh, okay. All right, next question then.
Good evening. My name is John Bell. I'm a staff member here at the university. Maybe this is an appropriate last question. Who bells the cat? Or put it more bluntly, how much is this all going to cost? Clearly there was a tremendous cost economically, also socially, emotionally to the people who were without water for 3 days. But the efforts that are, the recommendations that have been brought forward this evening are going to cost substantial money, raising taxes or something. Is there an estimate of how much this is going to be, and what are the costs if we don't do it?
Thank you.
Well, I think the last part of your question is probably a little easier to answer. We know, and there will be much more information coming out, I think in the coming weeks to months, of the economic cost to our community. And I agree with you that there's much more impact beyond the cost that's occurred over the last few days. But we know, we're now, I think all of us as individuals realize how much we're dependent on our water, how much of various sectors of our economy, including restaurants and any kind of manufacturing of food products that involves water. So it's very extensive. So this likely will end up being a very expensive proposition in terms of the impact, plus adding all the labor costs and material. It's a multi-million dollar, tens of millions of dollars, I suspect, by the time we come up with estimates of this. So that piece of it we know. And of course, we're at risk, and other communities are, for these events in the future, and they're looking at those kind of costs. In terms of what it would cost, we're going to have to take these actions. There will be costs involved. I don't think you can point any individual or any study that will say to you, taking this particular action is going to have this cost. As a society, we have to, I think, look at and say, we've got to make an investment here in our future, in our society, for public human health, to make sure that people are assured they're drinking water in all communities, not just Toledo is safe, and that our economies continue to grow and thrive, agriculture, industry that relies on water. I think it's a worthwhile investment. We're going to have to make that tough decision.
I have a little bit to add on to that. On the side of the water treatment plant, one of the things that we have to deal with is that we have a very old water treatment plant. Ours was one of the oldest in the nation. At points when it was first built, we first had a water treatment plant here in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, but this is when Toledo started treating its water. And it is an aging infrastructure, and that's a problem. We have to upgrade that. We have to deal with the fact that things have changed. We have different regulations. We have tighter and tighter. Every day that goes by, we can measure things at a lower and lower level that's in the water thanks to very sophisticated equipment. So as we measure things, we now get to the question, like we are now, should we drink this? We can measure. We know it's there. Should we be drinking it? So we're going to be dealing with this problem. We're going to have to upgrade the water treatment plant to put new forms of treatment, more sophisticated treatment, and that, I believe, estimates that I have heard going around are hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. But we have to take care of what's going into the water treatment plant, but we also have to take care of the water treatment plant itself.
None of us in this room are asking ourselves how much the 1972 Clean Water Act cost our nation. We're all thanking God or our higher power that we did it and that we acted upon it. So we can't look back. We have to look forward and do what's best for ourselves and for our future generations, because it is a right of all Americans and people throughout our world to be able to drink their water. It's the most fundamental basis of life. We're all like 98% water.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question, then that will be the final question for this evening. Sir.
Yes, thank you. We have currently a company that's running a facility on what is termed Facility 3. a dredge island, which is out in the middle of Lake Erie. They're mixing dredge material, which is high in phosphorus and nitrogen, with Class B biosolids, and it has gotten out of hand. There is a lot of material there. I can't tell you exactly how much, but it's probably close to 500,000 cubic yards. It's sitting on top of a limestone dike. I used to work for EnviroSafe. I know that you build a dike with clay and you build it and recompact it. You don't use limestone. The limestone is allowing the nutrients to leak into the lake. We heard applause before. We heard somebody say, yes, I'll do that. How many of you will stand up right now and say, yes, tomorrow I'm going to call and I'm going to make sure that that material is taken off of Facility 3. They can do it some other place. There's a permit that is needing to be enforced. So somebody in this group has to stand up. All of us have to stand up and say, you got a permit? Follow the permit. I worked for EnviroSafe from 1980 to 1999, 1995, and we had 0 violations. And we had 0 violations because my boss, who passed away about 3 months ago, Jim Hamilton, forced us to comply with the permit. And he always said, only VPs and above go to jail, but it takes 4 to play pinochle. And so we all worked with him, and we made sure that we didn't have violations.
Well,
And
sir, we thank you for your comments, and I don't think we can expect our panelists to respond in specific to that comment, but we do thank you for your comments. And I would like to, at this time, thank all of our panelists for being here tonight, and thank all of you for being here. I'm hopeful that this has helped you, that it's helped all of us as we work through this, and wonder if Dr. Naganathan would like to make some final comments before we say good night. But this will be my final comment. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this tonight.
Please, I would like to add my thanks to Susan for her terrific moderation this evening. Please join me in a round of hands for a great moderation this evening. Like Susan said, I want to thank the panel. 3 days ago, or over the weekend when we were dealing with this issue, I mentioned to my colleague, I think Dr. Calzanetti, we should consider doing this forum. He didn't ask 10 questions. He said, when would you like to do it? I said, as soon as possible. So thanks go to Dr. Calzanetti, Office of Government Relations, and his staff, and also our external relations people and their staff. So please join me in thanking all of them for making this event possible. You know, we pride ourselves as a relevant and engaged university, and we cannot be engaged unless both sides are engaged. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. Again, as I said before, this is the first step of many things that are going to happen. This is not a monolithic solution. This is going to happen with all of us pulling together. So I thank you for being here this evening. I look forward to having you back in this engaged university campus in the very near future. Thank you. Good night.